Welcome back to another podcast episode where we help aspiring developers get jobs and junior developers grow. With me today, I actually have Paulo and Celine joining me. We're going to do a coding bootcamp review on Wagon. And this one was a little interesting to try to schedule guests because there are campuses all around the world. And to be honest, I actually hadn't heard about it until I saw it on Course Report and started looking more into it. But on Course Report, that's usually kind of what I encourage, I encourage people to look at to guide their decision on picking a coding bootcamp. And you guys are really highly rated. It sounds like you guys are doing something really well. And so I was really interested in figuring out what's going on over there. So we'll start with our intros. Paula, you want to do a short intro? Tell us about yourself.
Sure. So hi, my name is Paulo. I graduated the Tokyo Wagon Bootcamp in June of 2019. And I'm a founder of Odaiba, an app that is bringing socialization to the online learning.
Cool. Thank you. How about you, Celine?
Yeah, I'm Celine. I did the Wagon Bootcamp in Bali, actually. And I also graduated last year in July. And since then, that was kind of in my gap year after my bachelor's. So I haven't, unfortunately, started my own startup or gone right into the coding world. But I'm trying to keep it on the side, and it's definitely surprisingly been a passion or become a passion of mine, which I wasn't expecting.
That's interesting. So you paid a lot of money and went to a very intense coding bootcamp, and it already wasn't a passion.
Yes, actually, it wasn't even not a passion. I had no idea what all of this was about. And I was slightly terrified of the whole concept by itself. I did my undergrad in business. So it's a very general degree that I don't know how many thousands and hundred thousands of people graduate from every year. So I wanted something to set me apart and something that's, modern and that's going to kind of grow in itself. So I thought of coding. And then I just, as you said, I did my research on several of these rating websites and the rankings and all of that. And then I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. I had to do the little courses on Data Camp and Code Academy. So I did get a little sneak preview into it, but really I was still quite terrified when I first arrived and for those first 2 weeks or something. And I guess I was very fortunate that I really enjoy it.
Yeah, it is fortunate. That's for sure. So, okay, to give viewers context, what are you doing with your coding degree? What did you go to it for?
Me?
Both of you. Oh. Paul,
okay.
right? Feel free to say.
So, okay. I wouldn't call it a degree, to be fair. It's more what we're doing with our coding tool set that we've received, because it's not so much about the paper. I actually found a job as a full-time developer, back-end Ruby on Rails. And that got me the experience and the more in-depth knowledge, in which I'm now trying to leverage in building my own app.
Okay. And I love that because I started my own company in January as a software engineer and then started my own company. So I love that path. It's a very hard path, but it's a fulfilling one. All right.
Yeah.
How about you? Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, sorry. Yeah, please.
I kind of took all of the skills that I got there, and when I started Wagon, I already had a master's degree lined up for afterwards. So I didn't per se go into, the whole job search and or internships or jobs or whatever you go for first. But I did a master's degree, and I'm still currently doing it in business analytics. So what I learned with Wagon helped me a lot. You know how they say once you know one coding language, the next one is really not that intimidating and not that difficult to learn. And that was absolutely true because Wagon mostly focuses on Ruby and Ruby on Rails in the back end. And now we're doing R, we're doing Python, we did a little bit of Tableau, and just for Python in itself, it was like I started at a whole different level than everyone else. And so I'm trying to pursue that a little bit. And then after I'm done, I'm going to look into internships or jobs as either a junior dev or, even data analyst or something like that.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, best of luck with that. I appreciate the extra context. Okay. So how did the application process go? What was it like there?
It was, probably it's different for each campus. In our case, we first had to go through 2 interviews with the drivers, so the ones who actually take care of the local chapter. And based on those interviews, they try to understand if your motivation is genuine, if you're really going to commit those 9 weeks, or if you just are nah, knowing how to code sounds nice, let me just throw some money at it and join this place. And after you pass that interview phase, you get some prep work to do before the bootcamp starts. So some essentially basic courses on Codecademy, on Ruby and JavaScript, just to get the fundamentals. And after that, you go and you join the bootcamp, and the program starts.
Yeah, in Bali, it was quite similar. So we had one interview, I believe, with the driver to also see if the motivation is genuine. And then the second stage kind of was a little course on Codecademy, I think. And we had to complete that within a certain time frame. So you know how it logs when you log in, and once you start working on it, and once you log out, it stops the timer. I think that course we had to complete within 10 hours of work. And if you were able to get through it within these 10 hours, then basically that was the threshold to kind of see that you could work quickly enough and grasp new concepts in a fast pace. And then the interview and that time, 10 hours, I want to say 10 hours, I'm not 120% sure on it, but those 2 things together then gave you, the acceptance. And then on top of that, we also got a lot of the prep material, and I think we had a bunch of videos to look at and a lot of things to work through. But that came after we'd actually been accepted to the bootcamp.
Really? In our case, it was part of the whole journey. So you would start maybe with the videos, then also go into the Codecademy course, and somehow it was just okay, you need to complete all of this, so you have to apply at least 2 weeks before the bootcamp starts, because you'll need that time in order to go through the whole material.
Yeah, those 2 weeks, we had that too. They said it's going to take you, if you sit down and really get behind it, 2 weeks. If you have something else to do, then maybe plan some extra time in for that. Yeah.
That's interesting. Do you feel like the challenges, did it have any tests or challenges that were difficult for you, or were you able to retake the challenges if you got them wrong in that program?
So they weren't really, it wasn't really like a test, so to speak. It was really more just, okay, here's some stuff that you need to go through, and it just takes time. It's really just about sitting and reading and investing that time into it. I don't know, maybe someone who has more difficulties understanding would be a little bit slower at it, but it's probably really, now we're speaking from the viewpoint of participants, so we don't know what's the whole real logic behind, but the way how it seems, it's really just, okay, are you motivated enough? Are you willing enough to put the time behind it? Because that's how the program works. It's you get a very short lecture, and then the whole day you're just working on exercises. And if you don't like working on exercises, better figure it out before you're actually joining.
Okay, interesting. So, I challenge coding boot camps in every single video. So I'm going to challenge this a little bit. It sounds like I love the pre-work. And I love that they kind of test your commitment to learning, because that's most of what it is. It's can you sit down and do the work? Because most people that do, they're going to be fine. And it's it's the effort that you put in. Like, no one's born a developer, and you need to put effort into it, and you need to put quite a bit of effort into it. And so I love that they give you a huge time commitment, even for the application process. That's one way to do it. The only caveat with that is that I would be concerned that people could skate through that because they aren't challenged, because they aren't tested, and still make it through. And they might have taken 2 months to do it. Whereas maybe that's not equal to the amount of pressure you're going to be under during the coding bootcamp. And so you could possibly be getting in participants that aren't quite up to everyone's skill levels, which is going to bring the entire cohort down a bit to try to catch them up. Do you think that's a possibility?
So I think that's two points to tackle with that. First of all, if you are taking 2 months to go through the prep work, that takes some serious amount of pre-planning for you. Because I don't think people usually go, it's like, which bootcamp can I start 2 months from now? Like, if anything, it's like maybe 1 month. And
you'd be surprised.
Okay, but also by the time you go through the interview process, you don't have all those 2 months at your disposition.
Okay. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
The second point is, yes, even with this, you get members with different skill levels. And I don't think that is such a bad thing at the end of the day, because at Wagon, we do a buddy system where for each day you're sitting and working together with one of your batchmates. And this changes every single day. And they invite you to, if you're faster than your buddy, sit with him, try to explain him the exercise, try to help him come fast, like go forward faster than, or bring him to your level. I think this is really important because part of the learning process is also learning how to explain what you're doing to someone else.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the whole buddying system, for me, that was such a game changer. And I'm happy to speak about it again later. But back to what you were saying, that you might end up with people in different skill levels and, because they take 2 months or 3 months or whatever to complete this. I, for example, because I had a gap year, right, I was planning quite far in advance. So I think I applied in December and the bootcamp started in April. So that was 4 months. So I had like a long bit of time, but I was still working full time for, I think, 3 of those 4 months. So then, I thought, okay, I've got a bit of time here, or I'm going to be very stressed there. So I kind of spread it out a tad. But then again, at least for the batch in Bali, and maybe for other batches, they do that as well, we had to complete this other Codecademy course within 10 hours, right? So there you can't, unless you're that advanced of a coder already, to stop the time countdown from counting down. But then I don't think you have to come to the coding bootcamp, So it's already tracking how quick you're doing this, and if you're able to kind of go at that fast of a pace. And then the pre-work that you're doing, in a lot of ways, it's just there to reinstate what you will be doing in the actual bootcamp. So you're already learning about Ruby. You're already learning about Ruby on Rails. You're already doing some HTML, some SCSS, all of these things. And then in the actual bootcamp itself, there's going to be a lecture in the morning where they go over it again. So it's 2 hours in the morning where then they kind of teach it. But they say these 2 hours in the morning where we go over the content extremely quickly, this is not enough for you to understand what's happening. You have to sit down in the beginning, and you have to, before everything starts, go through it, take your time, maybe read one article twice because you just don't understand it the first time. And then when a teacher or the driver actually explains it to you, maybe this is the second or the third time that you're hearing it, then for me, it happened a lot of times that this final piece, it kind of clicked into space, I kind of had an idea of what was going on, but I couldn't really grasp it. And then when I heard it again and with different examples and him, live coding in front of us, then it often it gave me this aha moment where I really understood what was happening.
I actually had that experience with Ruby hashes, where I've been trying to learn about coding through different apps like Solo Learn or some gamified apps on learning. And it would just never click. It's like, we have arrays, and arrays are already collections of different objects. Why do we need to have another collection? And how am I starting to use this other collection? Like, it just, I couldn't understand, and I couldn't get past this point in whatever app I was trying to use. And then when we were finally in the bootcamp and we were at that lecture, and the teacher was explaining about, these are hashes, this is how we use them, this is why they are good as opposed to standard arrays. I was like, now everything makes sense.
I'm glad you had that moment. So it sounds like in my scenario where you do it within 10 hours or you do extend it, Celine, like you did, to 4 months, it sounds like it wasn't really a detriment to your experience at the coding bootcamp, and that's kind of what I'm getting at, is if it wasn't, like, if the gap is too far, you are going to lose out on the experience, which is unfortunate. This is really what I was kind of pushing at, but it sounds like the gap must not have been far enough where the person that you paired with is still going to actually grow, because they're able to kind of like coach you through the actual exercise. It's not like, it sounds like they don't really have to like go back way to the fundamentals to even like start working on the exercise. So the gap wasn't that big, if anything, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's kind of what I was getting at, and that's really good to hear. Well, both of you started diving into it already, so let's dive into the curriculum. And that's the biggest part of it, right? So what would both of you think of it?
I think it's amazing, frankly. It just feels structured so well, where you do 1 week fully just on Ruby, plain old Ruby, and then you go second week into the object-oriented programming principles using Ruby, where you build classes, other classes that inherit from the previous classes, and you try already building a simple app which displays on the terminal. Then you go into databases, like using pure SQL, moving into Active Record, which is a big part of Ruby on Rails. From then you move into the front end, and 1 week for HTML, CSS, and simple JavaScript, just to modify the DOM, until it all comes together in the Rails week, and then you see how each part is interacting with each other, and these things that you were building in such a simple way at the beginning, now you can build as a full-fledged web app. And then you have 3 weeks just to build web apps.
Yeah, I have to agree with everything you said. Absolutely. I thought just the way that they planned the whole 9-week bootcamp, it was so well thought through. And even though, in the beginning, you're just doing bits and pieces of it, they know this. I remember our driver and our teacher, they kept on saying, they were like, listen, the first 5 weeks, it's going to be tough. And at points and at times you're going to be like, what am I even doing? And why is this, And they were like, trust us. Once you get to week 6, I think it was week 6, you will be like, whoa, okay, now I see where this comes together, and we put this at the bottom and this on the top. So the fact that already, on the first day, they were able to tell us it's going to take 5 weeks where you'll be frustrated at times and it's going to be confusing, but then it will all be worth it. Like, just how they built up the whole curriculum, I thought it was really, really well done. And that kind of, I think, not just the curriculum, but the entire program, right? So no matter which Le Wagon campus you go to, it's always going to be the same. And the drivers and the teachers, best of my knowledge, I think they all go through the same teaching training, and they all have yearly get-togethers where they come together and they're like, oh, we found this is better to teach in that way, and this is better to give the students that insight and stuff like that. So it's very just well organized and well focused. And even the prepping material that we have to go through, it is Codecademy and Data Camp and stuff courses, but it's also just an entire course, prospect, I want to say, from Le Wagon, where you have videos of the founders explaining what's happening. So it's incredibly well thought through and planned out.
And I have to say, even I've had the same experience where they were telling us it's going to be hard, just keep working on it. But being able after just 2 weeks to build a simple app, something that already works, that I could share with my friends, and just to give an idea, what we were building is an app that scrapes a website to get some recipes, save it on the machine, and then display on the terminal. And like something super simple, but the fact that after just 2 weeks, we could already build something, I just felt such an accomplishment. It's like, look, I can already build something. I can already show it to my friends. It's great. Like I am making progress. I don't have to wait this 5, 6, or 9 weeks to show that I've made some progress. I can show it right now.
Okay. It sounds like, I think almost every coding bootcamp has the idea of trust the process, and I think almost everyone panics. It's a pretty normal behavior. I know I definitely did. I even thought like, oh my God, should I even be here? Did they make a mistake of bringing me in? Especially in the beginning. Okay, so a couple questions from that. What do you guys think of JavaScript? You had to learn it on the side of Ruby? It's a very different language.
All right, I'll go first. I did not like it, and I still do not like it. I think it was a really rough transition from a language that is so verbose and so easy to understand, like just as while you're writing what you're trying to do with it, all of a sudden to go to a different language that it just works so differently, that I ended up with this feeling inside, it's like, maybe JavaScript really is not for me. And like during the whole project weeks, I tried touching as little JavaScript as possible. And even today, like when I'm building my own apps, like just on the side, or I still try to find someone else who has more JavaScript experience to let them work on it.
Yeah, I agree. I did not love the JavaScript week or time. I think it's nice that we got to touch upon it, and it's good that we got an insight into it and have like the very basic of a basic understanding of what's happening. But if I had to choose between Ruby and JavaScript, there is absolutely no, chance that I would ever pick JavaScript over Ruby. I have to agree.
Okay, that's fair. I do nothing but JavaScript, and I completely understand where you're coming from. I do. It's almost like a badge of honor when you've worked with JavaScript for so long. It's such a quirky language. You kind of feel proud that you're able to work with it, but it still is frustrating to this day. I get it. So it sounds like JavaScript was kind of a supplement, and Ruby was your main focus.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. JavaScript was really just to sprinkle some special effects on the front end. That is how it's being conceived. And in all fairness, like after you complete the bootcamp, there is a free React course that you can watch, and you can do some exercises through it. But it feels very different from the whole Ruby on Rails experience. It's structured in a different way. So I myself could not complete it, partly because, again, it was JavaScript, and I just had this sort of refusal towards JavaScript, partly because it was much more advanced.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Do you feel like, so there are Ruby jobs, and generally, so I can really only speak for the United States. Mm-hmm. Ruby, and I want you to tell me in your countries. So, Celine, you're in the United States. Paulo, you're in Japan. In your countries, do you feel like there were, how do I ask this? Do you feel like there were enough positions in Ruby to make it worth it? Did you go to Wagon? And I'm sure I'm butchering the name. I'm just going to say it like that. But did you go to that coding bootcamp because it was teaching Ruby, or because it had such a good reputation?
So I always feel like I'm the first one answering the questions.
Oh, do it.
I went to Wagon because I had to find a job. I was at the state where I had quit my previous companies. I couldn't find a job because I don't speak Japanese, and I had more of a business background, and trying to get a business-oriented job when you don't speak the language is very difficult. So I went through the hard skill route, and I'm lucky because in Japan, Ruby is actually very popular. And a big reason for that is that one of the core contributors is Japanese. So it has a very good documentation in Japanese, which other languages do not. So many companies, because the level of Japanese here is not very good, so developers will by default fall back on Japanese documentation, which brings up the level of Ruby and therefore Ruby on Rails in the market.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I don't think I'm as qualified to even say anything on this because, as I said, I knew I had the master's degree lined up. So I never even, looked very much into the job market because I had 2 months. And in 2 months, it's not even worth an internship, right? Because by the time you know what you're doing, it's already over. So for the companies, they don't really take people on for such short amount of time. And the reason actually that I did this boot camp, I think the choice I made was very much based on the ratings and the rankings, and that Le Wagon is just a very, very, popular boot camp. I have to say that I actually live in Germany. So when I, applied to everything, I was in Germany, and Le Wagon being from France and Europe, of course, it's got I think a bit more of a
foothold
momentum in the in Europe than it has in the States. So that's kind of, I guess, a big part of it was that. And also, since I didn't really know what I wanted to do in the future, for me, it's a whole big tangled up thing, right? Because I saw that a lot of product managers, when they had teams of developers, they couldn't talk to their teams, right? There was such a disconnect in what the developers were saying and what the project manager or product manager was understanding or capable of understanding, just because they had no coding experience whatsoever. That I said, I am interested in going that path later in life. And I don't want to be one of those product managers that has no idea what's happening with my product and with my team, So I was thinking, if at least I have some basic understanding, maybe they won't have to break it down 5 steps. Maybe they'll only have to break it down 2 steps to speak with me, But even this smaller discrepancy and, being able to talk a little bit more eye to eye, I thought that was really worth it. And that was already a good enough motivation to go for a coding bootcamp.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually, to go back a little bit also on the reason why I chose Le Wagon, because it wasn't just because they were teaching Ruby and Ruby is popular here in Japan. Actually, there are only 2 programming boot camps in Tokyo in English. So there's a bunch in Japanese, but not speaking Japanese, it's doesn't really help me, but there were only 2 in English. And for me, the main reason why I ended up choosing Le Wagon was that the competitor actually had as a prerequisite that you had to pass a JavaScript test. You would do an interview in JavaScript, and only if you pass it, you could go and join the bootcamp. Which I guess it's the same logic behind. We need to see that you're really motivated and you can study on your, you can understand on your own. But as a person who was trying for so long to learn coding by himself and never managed, it just didn't make sense to me. Why are you making me learn on my own something that I'm not able to learn as a condition before even joining you? So I defaulted to Le Wagon based on that.
Interesting. And I think I can answer that question. First of all, you are capable of it. You just don't believe you are. And that's most people's situations. But I get wanting to go to structured learning because you want structured learning. So the thing about being a developer, and this is maybe not towards you two, this is really towards the viewers. The reason why a lot of coding boot camps want you to learn on your own initially to pass that test is because part of being a developer is part of figuring out how to get something done. You're going to encounter so many challenges along the way.
Yeah.
And if you aren't resourceful enough, if you're the type of developer that needs to ask someone how to do it versus being resourceful enough to like digging that information out and like figuring it out and getting that solution out there, even if it's a really crappy solution, at least you figured something out. That's going to be a developer that's more hireable than someone that's just asking people a bunch of questions. And you don't really but the thing is, you don't really realize that and discover that until you are in the coding bootcamp and they teach you how to learn, They teach you how to solve. And so a lot of people do get discouraged. They see that test. And I think what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to encourage people to, even if you're not confident, even if you think you're going to fail, just give it a try. Like you're going to grow as a person. You really are with that. But I completely get the decision of like, why you went the direction you did.
Like, I understand what you're explaining, and yes, it's true that it's really important for you to be able to find the solutions using Stack Overflow or whatever. But it becomes much more. It has much more sense to expect that from a developer once you give him at least some basic tools to work. Because otherwise it's like, I don't even know what I should be Googling for. I don't even know where I should start from. And you are stonewalling me from even joining your program and giving you money because you don't even give me like some path to go there. You just say, learn on your own, pass this test, and then we can talk. Instead of, okay, we'll give you the basics and we'll push you to learn on your own also during the program to look for the answers, especially during the week, because that is what's going to make you a good developer.
So most coding bootcamps, when they give a test, they'll say, go ahead and here's what you should read and study for it. You're saying that other coding bootcamp didn't do any of that?
They suggested either to read the book Eloquent JavaScript,
okay,
or to go through their preparatory work, which is like a part-time JavaScript bootcamp that should prepare for that test. But then it was, like 1.5 bootcamps as opposed to only one bootcamp.
That makes sense. Okay, but at least they did give that prep material, even if like you didn't really agree that that's the path you want to go down.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's important because I think any bootcamp that doesn't give you a prep material, at least guidance on like what to do to prepare for the test, I think that's kind of a yellow flag, and you should avoid a bootcamp like that because to me, that's telling of how much guidance you're actually going to get in the coding bootcamp, something that you're going to spend a lot of money in. So, okay, I love your perspective. I appreciate you sharing me that perspective because I like hearing why people choose certain coding boot camps. I had one more question about the curriculum. So you mentioned you had like 3 weeks to do, I think it was just like actual project work, right?
Yeah.
Is that where you were building up a portfolio? Were you able to put those projects on your portfolio? Did you guys build a portfolio at all to showcase your projects?
So what they did is they continuously encouraged us to push even these smaller little apps that we were building to GitHub, right? So we do have, I think, almost every day there would be some small project that you could push there. Like we tried to do a little search engine where while you're searching, it gives you the recommendations and what the next letter could mean and all of these things. So we did have a lot of small things to push. But then throughout these last 3 weeks, what happens is you have 1 week where you're building. So you're split up in teams of 4 people. And 1 week you're kind of working on like a fun project, something that's just kind of a dumb idea that somebody came up with very quickly, something that just let's do it very quick. And that is to understand and to practice how to work in teams, firstly, in teams of 4, which is more than we had before, just the buddy system. And then also how to do something from like the very beginning where you try to design your database on a piece of paper with a pen, all the way to, let's get everything set up, let's get the Rails application going, and then let's fill that with life. And in the end, let's, have the front end built up as well. So that's in 1 week. And then the last 2 weeks, there's a pitch night in the evening and the beginning, and people can pitch their ideas. They say, I would like to build this kind of app, or I think that's a good thing. So what we had, for example, was a management app 4 studios. So let that be a fitness studio, boxing studio, yoga studio, whatever you want to do. And it was a girl. She had the idea. She kind of pitched that. And then you can choose which app you would prefer to work with. And then by that, I think you rank it, and then everybody gets, one assigned app. And then for 2 weeks, you have a team. And again, you start by, drafting the database on a piece of paper, and then you slowly work your way all the way up to the end where, on the final evening, there's a big demo night. Everybody can invite friends and family and all of that. And then everybody will demo and present the app that they built within those 2 weeks.
I would just like to add to that the first week, the first project week, at least in our case, it was like an Airbnb copycat. So it's not just a random app. It's think of a marketplace where you have someone who's offering a service and someone else who's looking for that service, and build something with that idea in mind, so that and that will be your 1 week project. So it can be like, okay, I have from our batch, we had ideas like, I want to build a marketplace for people to lend their their Rolex or their expensive bags, because maybe some MBA students still don't have enough money to buy the original ones. Or in our case, we had an app to look for English-speaking doctors in Japan, and doctors to be able to book their appointments in here. So just a simple marketplace like that. And it's not just to have fun or to learn how to work in groups, because there's when we first deal with GitHub and branches and merge conflicts and all that. That is big part of the learning experience for that 1 week. But it's also where we start working more on user experience. So it doesn't become anymore just, hey, let's build an app that works, but let's build an app that is pleasant to use for the user. And there's a lot of feedback on that point, because you have to pitch your app every 2 or 3 days. And that's another point of that experience. They teach you about how do you pitch your app? How do you present it to an audience so that they understand what is going on? And it's all practice for what you end up doing with your final project.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they prep you also, right? How do you pitch it to non-developers specifically? If you actually want to then go out and make that app your company or your idea, how do you pitch that to investors that don't necessarily have very technical background?
Yeah.
I like that part.
And Celine, to expand on what you just said, I was actually surprised to see so many product managers applying to coding boot camps as well. It was just, it's a lot of money. It's very intense. And for a product manager to go through it, it really shows how big of a gap of knowledge and communication in general, companies can have with developers. And that's really interesting.
No, absolutely. Sometimes the team breaks it down so much that then the problem that they're facing, or the blockage that they're facing, seems like some little, incident where, it's not even that important, just work around it. But actually, when they, if they would sit down and speak to you as if you'd understand what's happening, then it's oh my God, of course, there's no way that we can work around this. We must change something, or, in a different part of the application. And where I worked last, at my last job, one of the product managers, he said that at his former job, he was from Poland. So he said in Poland, a lot of the time, they will not hire any product managers that don't have any coding experience, because they said, we've just had so many discrepancies and so many cases where the team and the team lead couldn't really talk to each other, that they've just said, okay, you don't have to be a professional, experienced of 10 years backend developer, but you need to have some sort of basic understanding of what's going on. And I agree. I think that would really minimize a lot of the conflicts and a lot of the communication gaps that are in companies today.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So Both of you kind of hinted towards like the first week being a lot of preparation. And so it sounds like the final week is kind of the main thing that you all are focused on. Do you feel like the final project it got employers' attention? And I know, Celine, you might not be able to talk about this, but you probably can. Do you feel like it was a complex enough project where you felt that it best resembled what you had learned and what you could do as a developer?
From my point of view, yes. I think I was quite impressed with what we built in the end, to be honest. I mean, it's only 9 weeks, right? So not even 3 months. And then when I was standing there and I was giving the presentation, and it was, 50, 60 people. And I was like, yes, we built this. And then I thought back, I was like, wow, okay. 2.5 months ago, I didn't know what a console is, and now I'm here and we did this. Like it's incredible, frankly. And I would not be shy at all to show this to people where I'm applying to. Quite the opposite. I am very proud of what we did there. And of course, this is a thing that we built in 2 weeks. So there's still some bugs. There's still some things that weren't perfect, by the time that we had to present. But I know a lot of people kept on working on it afterwards, especially those that did want to land a job in that industry immediately. So they continued to work on that. They kind of brought it up to a place where they were happy with it. For some people that was maybe 1 day of work, for others maybe, a week or 2 weeks. But everybody that did go into that path and that did find a job afterwards, they very much broadcasted their final project as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
I put it on my portfolio as well, with the other projects. So while talking in some interviews, they were asking about what have you built and which technologies were you using and what's the point. So I think definitely it did open. If it didn't open some doors, at least it helped with the interview process. Because I was able to say not just hey, I have learned this, but look, I have learned this and I have applied to build something like that.
Okay. Sounds like it was very effective. And, one of the reasons why I'm asking that is 3 weeks isn't a lot. 9 weeks isn't a lot. And to be able to produce what all of you produced in 9 weeks, that's impressive. Interesting. So what do you think of the instructors?
So in my personal case, I was pretty happy with them. But again, there's the system is you have the lead teacher who can sometimes be the driver, but other times not. And then you have a whole bunch of teaching assistants. So with the lead teacher, I was definitely in Tokyo, he's a guy he was in the first Tokyo Bootcamp ever. Then he found a job. He worked there for 2 years, something like that, and came back to work as a teacher. And he's great. Doug, shout out to him. He's really great at teaching and explaining, really very, very satisfied. But then the teaching assistants, sometimes there are people who are working and have some experience in what they're doing. So for example, for the front end week, they would take teaching assistants who are working on the front end. But other times there are fresh graduates from the previous bootcamp, and they're essentially just one lesson ahead of you. So the level can vary quite a lot. But even in this case, even though you might have someone who's okay, he doesn't know that much more than I do, at least having the presence of at least one very good and very experienced teacher, it still gives you the opportunity to fall back that, okay, if you ask something and this specific teaching assistant cannot explain it very well, he can come and bring someone else who will be able to explain it.
Yeah, I must agree. So we also had a lead teacher, and he was very experienced. He'd worked as a developer for a lot of years. I think he still did it part-time because the bootcamp always goes for 9 weeks, right? And then there's a little break of 2 months, and that's where then he went back into his full-time job. So he was very much, just in the action, I want to say. And what I loved is that, of course, you have the 2-hour lecture in the morning of the lead teacher, but then for the rest of your day, you're working on projects, right? And on assignments with your buddy. And we had, I think, a total of 5 teachers/TAs on campus, I want to say, but we're only 21 people or something like this. So you have 1 teacher per 4 people, which really is just a great ratio. You have a little ticketing system. If you have a question, I think they say if you work on something, you're stuck for 10 minutes, your buddy can't help you either, put it in that system and then we'll come around to you. And they don't give you the answer. They really try to make you find the answer. Like, this is one of the big things that I think they are really, very hard and very hardcore on. Like, they will not give you the answer. They won't say, oh, you're missing a column there. Oh, you have to change this. Oh, this doesn't work because of that. But they try to really make you understand why it's not working and what you have to change and why now it is working. So the teaching experience all around, I really enjoyed. And we even had alternating teachers. So even the person that gave the lecture, I want to say 80% of the time it was our lead teacher. And then for some of the front end, one of the other TAs, he jumped in because he was more experienced in that field. So they really tried to cater to everyone's, best knowledge.
Yeah, our lead teacher for JavaScript is a guy who has learned JavaScript and has been working with JavaScript for 3D modeling. So also very experienced and very good.
Okay.
Jan, I did not forget about you.
All right. So it sounds like overall is a good experience. And, this is typically what I hear of many boot camps is, usually you're going to have a lead teacher. You're going to have people that are more experienced. You're going to have people that are less experienced. And ultimately, you want to get as long as a student does learn, as long as they grow. I really like what you had mentioned where they really encourage you to try to figure it out on your own. And that's so crucial in developing that behavior and that habit in developers. So that's really good to hear. It sounds pretty typical, and it sounds like you had a good experience. Now, what we went over the application process. We went over the curriculum and what your instructors were like. Let's dig into it a little bit. Let's talk about constructive criticism. If you had to change anything to make your experience better for the students, what would you think about, I would actually focus a little bit more on the curriculum and the instructors. What kind of advice would you give them to make their coding bootcamp even better?
Frankly, I don't know. Like my general feeling after the bootcamp is I got everything that I wanted plus something more. And I don't know, maybe there you can go and be super nitpicky and saying, well, this exercise didn't make really that much sense. Maybe you could think about one that fits a little bit better. But if I look in general at the level of the lead teachers and at the level of the curriculum, I have to say I'm 100% satisfied.
Yeah. I feel very similarly about this, especially coming from a background that had nothing to do with coding or any technical experience whatsoever. It was hard to know what to expect, from the whole bootcamp and what to expect. I come out with this and that tool set. So I was already very pleasantly surprised when in the end of those 9 weeks, I could stand there and present a fully functioning app, Of course, there's always, this one TA where I say, whenever I asked a question to that person, they couldn't quite explain very well what was happening. But then I know that this exact TA, other people loved because the way that she or he explained, they thought was so much better, So I think at that point, it just comes down to personal preference. And I had, plenty of TAs that I thought were brilliant and that really helped me whenever I needed. I don't know. I really liked the experience. I liked that it was 5 days a week, that it was like a full-time job kind of thing. I know that Le Wagon now also offers part-time boot camps where I think you only do it a couple of days a week. But I think for what I needed and for what I wanted, Le Wagon was quite the perfect fit, really. Yeah.
I think actually, so there, from what I saw and from what I experienced, there were two pushbacks or two requests in a way to the curriculum. One is, okay, we want to have more JavaScript, like we want to learn more about React or another framework, where I understand in a way where that feeling is coming from or where that request is coming from. But on the other hand, it's like you already have a 9-week bootcamp, and either you make it longer and pay more for it, or you have to cut something out. And I really cannot see like what we could cut from this very well structured 9 weeks. And the second one, and that actually was a little bit my feeling at some point, is like I would want something that helps more for the job seeking process, or like something that is more focused on developers who are looking for a career as a developer. But there, it turned out that it was more like my misunderstanding, so to say, because Le Wagon is focused primarily on entrepreneurs. Like to say, you have an idea, you want to build something. Here we give you the tool set so that you can build it, and not just that, we give you the insight on user experience, on what's the word? When you prepare with Figma, like the
design.
Design.
Yeah, not just design, but actually like building the individual views, and that when you click on a button, it will lead you to another.
I mean, like that would be more like a UI designer. Basically, that's what we would call them in the United States. There might be a couple other.
There's another word for that I cannot remember at this point. But like, okay, so there's the UX design, UI design, and also the pitching. All things that if you want to be a startup like a startup founder, these things bring you much more value. And that is something that after getting into building my own startup, I can appreciate much more. Because it's a really big difference between like, I'm a backend developer, I really do not care about how other members are designing the app or how it's being used. I just need to write code that works, and I need to learn about how do I debug, how do I use the network tab on a page. And like, these were things that were missing for me and that I struggled at the beginning of my work time, as opposed to I'm trying to build my own app and I need to make it in a way so that users enjoy using it and they understand how to use it.
So does that coding bootcamp focus a little bit on UI design and UX?
Yeah. So we have a whole day, product sprint, so-called, where the lecture is about UI and UX design, about personas and how to like imagine who you're building it for, what is the value that you're bringing to them, what is the what problem, what pain are you trying to solve with your app? And this was something that was really pushed very strongly for when we were thinking about our own apps. Like when you come and when you pitch about your app, do not pitch something that is a nice to have. Think of a pain, think of something that people are really missing, and then pitch an app that solves this pain. So that also when you go into the product sprint, you are working around this pain and you're thinking about this. And it's really the full day just dedicated on UI design with Figma and then UX design with how can you help these users.
Yeah, I agree. And even in those last 2 weeks where you're building your final project, right, where I said we start with mapping it out on a paper, the databases, of course, you're working in your group and you're working in your team, and every team is doing a different project and it's at different stages, but you still get a little bit of guidance from those teachers, or I want to say you get as much guidance as you ask for, right? So every morning there's a stand-up where you say, this is what happened yesterday and this is what I'm going to work on today. And then every evening as well, a little recap of, what happened, what were the kind of blocks, where did we go wrong, what didn't work, what worked. And in that also, again, we had to do the Figmas, we had to do the whole design process of it, which took, a lot of time, where some of the students were like, I don't have to do this. I just want to get to the logic of the back end, and I don't care. We'll figure out what it looks like when we have to figure out what it looks like. Okay, let me just leave you the hell alone. But in the end, I think it was a very realistic view or mirror of what happens when you try to develop your own your own app. So I think in a way, maybe the bootcamp is more targeted at people that have their own idea already, and they want to build it and they want to get out there. And maybe it's a little bit less targeted at people that just want to become a general backend developer, right? But that's why they also advertise themselves as a full stack bootcamp, right? They focus very much on the back end, but they try to put equally as much focus on the front end as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a few opinions on this. This is really interesting. So they advertise. So hold on. Where do I want to start? It does sound like they're focused on entrepreneurs. In fact, I probably would have enjoyed that coding bootcamp more than Full Stack Academy, because I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I mean, I created my own business, right? I was a software engineer for a few years, and I would have appreciated more focus on solidifying my concept in my head and figuring out the actual problem that I'm solving and designing for that before I even touch code. I love that idea, and it's something I'm trying to grow with right now. Now, with people trying to become a software engineer, when you say they advertise as a full stack developer in the United States, typically that does not touch design at all. It doesn't touch UI design, UX really. It'll touch the front end. And usually you'll pick up a front end framework with Full Stack Academy. But it's really interesting to hear a different definition of a full stack developer. And it does sound like a definition for an entrepreneur or someone that wants to create a startup. Does that sound accurate? Because it's really interesting if that's the case.
Yeah. For me, what was a little bit the crushing with reality was realizing that what we call a front-end developer internally at Wagon does not mean, it's not what is being understood as front-end developer in the market world. Where for us, front-end developer was okay, this is the guy who understands about how colors interact with each other, how to make things look appealing and work with user-friendly, so to say. Well, while looking for front-end developer jobs, it was okay, you need to have React or you need to have Vue and experience in here. And these were things that we didn't touch at all. And then seeing that actually for them, it's just working with JavaScript. That's all that you're doing logic with JavaScript on the front end. That's all there is to it.
Okay. That is really interesting, because I just did a podcast episode encouraging front-end developers to learn UX, to learn design fundamentals. And most don't want to. Oh, well, I would say most, especially back-end developers, they don't want to. But I encourage all developers to learn a little bit about it, because the more connected we dove into, the more connected you are even with your users. Even if you aren't a big company, you're working on a product, the more you understand your users, the better, in my opinion, the better developer you are. And you're able to focus on the implementation that's actually going to solve the problem, rather than, just fitting the minimum requirements when you push that feature out. That's really interesting. Okay. One thing I have to say, it might be a cultural thing, but both of you are very cautious with constructive criticism. Or you don't really focus on digging in. Like you said, Paulo, it might just be petty. It might just be nitpicking. But nitpicking, I want you to keep in mind the reason why, I don't know, maybe it is just a United States thing, an American thing. Nitpicking is often how people learn, how they grow, how they constantly iterate on their product. And it's not it's just interesting seeing both of your personalities, a different perspective on it, because, I think, quite frankly, I think Americans need to appreciate different perspectives around the United States, and they need to hear how coding boot camps and even just developers run and work throughout the world. And I think what I'm trying to say is it's just a slightly different perspective that both of you have compared to when I interview coding bootcamps in the United States? People are very different. They're very willing to dive into, nitpick, be petty about little things. It's just interesting. I just wanted to note that. So I appreciate your experience either way. I really do. So we pretty much went over most of what I wanted to. You both did a really good job of diving into the curriculum, the instructors. And I think in a way you did kind of mention what you liked, like what you really liked and what you thought was okay during that process. Now, actually finding a job. And Celine, feel free to pitch in, but I know you're kind of going in a different direction with it. So Paulo, you might take over this conversation. What was it like finding a job? Like think about like how many jobs you had to apply to. Did you have any assistance with the coding boot camp? How long did it take? What was that experience like for you?
So it took me 1.5 months between graduating and starting my job. I had already started looking for jobs while I was in the bootcamp. Essentially, at the point where we did some weekend assignment, and I had almost finished the first week project. So I already had, and I knew what my final project was going to be about. So I could already put 3 projects on my curriculum. And with that, I said okay, let me go out there and let me start reaching out to companies and see what I can do. There was help from the bootcamp in terms of this is what you should put in your curriculum. This is how you should structure it. This is the kind of information that they want to see. They also brought recruiters on campus. Some of them with whom they have some partnerships, and that they have, those recruiters have helped place their graduates in companies, and they have been developing on that ever since. So essentially, the bootcamp after mine, they even implemented a career week, which was one free voluntary week after you graduated, where it goes deeper just in the aspect of let's find a job. And they've been partnering with more companies and placing more graduates as junior developers in those companies. But that's the future. My personal experience was, it wasn't easy. To be fair, it's not that I suddenly I had a whole bunch of job offers raining down on me, and I was just being picky about which one paid the most. It was a difficult process, and big part for that is that maybe it's more of a Japanese thing, or I don't know how it's in other countries, but overwhelmingly the expectation or the job offers or the expectations are you need to have 3 years experience. Because the way how it works here is there's a very strong culture of let's hire fresh university graduates for our junior positions. And if you are someone who's trying to change your career and you're trying to find a junior position in a company, there's barely any offers like that, because those are being covered by the students who get to join. So I think that was the most challenging part, how to, among all those because if you go and you search for Ruby developer on a job board, there's hundreds of offers, but 99% of them are you need to have 3 years experience at least. So how to find a job without having those 3 years experience was the biggest challenge. And I ended up landing my job. I ended up with 3 job offers after my process, but none of them were for a full, a pure backend developer or pure developer. One was for project manager, where I wanted to work on something more technical, and they were well, we are not really sure if you're going to have that opportunity. We want you to actually do the management side. The other was I applied for front-end developer. But with the interview, they were like, well, with your kind of experience and seeing where you want to go, because I said, like, I want to get like technical experience, but then I would like to have a leadership position, a product manager, project manager, scrum master, whatever. With the way you want to go, like, we would rather put you in this position where you're mostly operating with data, like some SQL stuff and building reports for clients, and then we'll teach you and we'll bring you to that path. And then the last one was like, well, you could do like half time as a backend developer and half time help us with our marketing, because we're trying to expand overseas and you speak English and have marketing experience. So I ended up going for the last offer. So there I used the fact that I had my marketing experience, and luckily later on it transitioned to a proper full-time backend developer job. So I ended up having what I wanted, but the path was not so easy how to get there.
Okay. I mean, that I could...
Congrats.
Thank you.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to weigh in very quickly and just very briefly. I think because Le Wagon is so spread out around the globe, right? It's quite difficult to generalize it. So now you're talking about this career week that started in the Tokyo batch. I think that is amazing and it's so cool. And I wish we would have had that, right? So getting back to the nitpicky, that would have been like brilliant. And I would have loved that. And I would have definitely signed up and stayed the extra week. Now the bootcamp that was situated in Bali, right? Where I was, of those 20 people, or 21, I think, only 2 of them were actually Indonesian, right? And I think only one of them actually was from the island of Bali. The other ones were from other, island groups. So nobody was really looking to stay in Bali. It was more like, I want to build my skill set and I want to do it with this company, with this bootcamp, and then now where am I going to go? And that was also my approach, right? I didn't go to the bootcamp in Bali because I wanted to land a job in Bali in development. So it was a bit of a different situation. And then everybody, went back home, might that be the UK or the US or, Australia or in a little bit further north in Asia, like wherever people were from, they just went back to where they'd come from pretty much. And then they looked for jobs there. So I think, maybe if I had done the bootcamp instead of going to Bali, I would have done it in Berlin. Then I would have still been in the German job market, and maybe then they would have been able to offer some sort of different transition. But I would guess that depending on the location, they might have different approaches to it. But yeah, I'm not 100% certain.
It's a similar experience here in Tokyo. So for the full-time bootcamp, most of the participants are actually from outside of Japan. Which was something for me, like, very difficult to understand as a person who joined the bootcamp because was trying to get a job. It's like, why the hell are you guys coming here to Japan? It's like, well, I have a gap here, or I'm just curious about programming, but I don't plan to be a developer. It's like, or I want to be a freelancer, a digital nomad. So anywhere is like just fine for me to learn about it. There were different reasons.
It's such I think it's so interesting to focus on. Hold on. Celine, can you pronounce the name again of the coding bootcamp?
Le Wagon.
Le Wagon? Is that it? Okay, I'm going to try to say it correctly from here on out. It's so interesting that they focus on a different, just a very different type of developer. It sounds, and I'm glad we kind of dove into this, but the fact that you're having people come to Japan, digital nomads that are going to go to Japan to just pick it up, because why not? I'm in Japan anyways, or I wanted to visit Japan. It's, to me, like, if it attracts people like that, it does feel like it produces a very well-rounded developer that, quite frankly, if both of you wanted to do and you wanted to focus on your development, I think you're going to be much more successful with the startup, much more successful with freelancing. And coding boot camps in the United States, they don't touch this at all. That's not their market. At least none of the top ones that I've reviewed. It's really interesting hearing this. It is. Okay, so I want to be cautious with your time. Last question. For developers that are trying to become developers, what would be your final piece of advice for them? And feel free to think about it.
For those who for those who haven't started or who are about to start, or for those who already have finished the bootcamp and they want to succeed?
It's a really good question. Let's focus on those that haven't quite started or are kind of in the beginning stages of starting.
I think, and this might not be the wisest, advice of the world. So, but I think, especially with your input, Don, that different boot camps focus on different things, right? If you do want to do a boot camp, to get informed about what the end goal of that bootcamp is, right? If you have a business idea in your mind, maybe Le Wagon is the perfect fit. You're going to learn how to not only build that idea, but how to pitch the idea, how to kind of sell it to other people, and how to continue to develop it even after the time is over. But if you've dabbled a little bit in backend and frontend, and 100% that you love backend and you want to really dive in deeper, and just for the rest, for the next couple of years, you really want to work as a senior backend developer, then probably a different bootcamp would be a better choice, right? So trying to understand what you hope to gain from participating in a bootcamp and then choosing accordingly. Because, if you go to any bootcamp, may that be Le Wagon or any other, if you're there and you're just not getting what you'd hoped for, it's going to drag you down. It's going to make you less motivated. And because of the whole buddying system and working in teams and then working in another team and the final project week, if you don't like what you have to do, you're not going to enjoy the time and you're not going to enjoy what you're doing. And then you're not going to learn as much, right? So doing the research beforehand, I think that would be very important.
Why'd you say that wasn't going to be wise advice? That was really good advice.
I mean, it's not that, specific. It's just like, do your research. But I think it really is important, do your research, know what you're trying to get out of it. And I guess just try to really find a bootcamp that's going to give you what you want. And also because, sorry, I'm going to cut this short, but, if you are the type of person like me that will just go to Bali for a bootcamp because she's interested in seeing, what this coding thing is, and I know that it might be useful in the future, then maybe that kind of bootcamp that is offered in, 20, 30, 40 locations throughout the world, that might be a better fit than the one that is only offered, in the local area where I'm from, because I know I enjoy talking and working and operating with people from all over the world. So if I go to a bootcamp that operates globally, the chances of just me, getting what I'm hoping for is a lot bigger than if I just went to the one down the street. Yeah, so do your research.
Cool, thank you.
From my side, for someone who's like just trying to get into it, I think the main advice I would give is coding is not about math. It's not about like some obscure logic, sorting and stuff like that. Coding is about building. Do not get put off by these concepts or words that you hear from maybe your friends who are more code savvy or from videos that you look online. That is not the level that you should be looking at. The magic of coding is that it helps you create things, and look for something that gives you the skills, gives you the tools to build what you want to build. That would be my advice.
I like that. I really like that. And a lot of people feel like becoming a developer is out of reach. Now, in the United States, we had this saying of a former president, everyone should learn to code. It was pretty similar to that. Now, I don't agree with that because it's not for everyone, but everyone can. And I do believe that. And I've talked to people that do feel intimidated by it. And they think, like even sometimes it's just from watching a hacker movie or, something like really out there. They're like, I could never do that. That would take so many years to learn. And it really, like the big thing that I say to people is the only people that don't become developers are ones that quit. Everyone can. Every single person can. Even during, our pandemic, a lot of people are having a harder time, and it might take a little bit more time, but they will get a position, and I think sometimes it's just giving people courage and confidence to be able to follow through with that, and they will become a developer if they have those two things. So I like that you mentioned that.
And ultimately, it's fun. I think what a lot of people don't realize, and I did not realize, it's actually fun. You sit there, it's kind of like a massive puzzle, trying to figure out what to do next, and you go back and forth and back again, and the idea I had 20 minutes ago, I think that was the right one. It's fun.
Yeah. So. It is like a game, but with the big difference that it doesn't just give you the fun experience, it also gives you the sense of accomplishment of having created something.
And that's a really good point. Well, and you know what? I'm actually going to touch on yours, Celine. I wish more programmers would remember what you just said. Because I think when you get into the business and when you get into hard requirements and you're working extra hours, it's hard to feel that fun anymore. And a lot of developers do get burned out. And that's why I highly encourage developers to focus on a work-life balance. I'm so against developers being overworked because it takes the joy out of it. And it did for me in one of my positions. And it took me a while to recognize that. But you have to remember, it is a lot of fun to solve problems. It really is. And when your focus is on building a really cool solution for someone, especially if someone's going to use what you built, that's really fulfilling. Paul, as you said, like you are building something that feels fulfilling to people. It's an accomplishment. And that I think developers sometimes just need a little reminder of what they're doing and the impact that they're having on the world. So that's it. That's the end of the podcast. I really appreciate you guys coming on, especially with you, especially learning in a different part of the world, because I focus on coding bootcamps with the United States. Is really interesting hearing your perspectives. And I could tell you it was different, very different than interviewing a lot of people from the United States that solely just kind of stick here. Let's do our outros. I'll start with me. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I try to do a different topic than these coding boot camps, and all of you are very vocal about how I should continue just doing coding boot camp reviews. So I'm going to do more of them. I am going to branch out a little bit, but I'm going to continue doing these reviews because I know I've got a lot of good feedback. So continue leaving your comments on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple, please rate it, give me feedback, send me messages, however you want to find me. I've been getting feedback every day, and I can't tell you, it fuels me every day to do this and plan more of these. So continue reaching out to me. I really appreciate it. Paulo, how about you?
Thank you for this experience. It was really fun also talking with both of you. Check out Odaiba. So we're building it for the COVID pandemic. We want to make the remote learning experience more fun, more engaging for students. So if you are a teacher who's trying to teach groups online, who's trying to deal with schools lockdown, we want to help you. Reach out to us and see that our solution can make your life and the life of your students more enjoyable.
Sounds good.
That sounds like a good idea. Check out Odaiba.
It's a very relevant problem.
For sure. No, thank you, Don, for having me. It was a lot of fun. First ever podcast I was on, so that was a nice experience. Cool. And yes, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or any of the other common platforms. My name is just the one that's displayed right now, so you should find me easily. And if you have any other questions about Le Wagon, specifically, of course, Bali, which I went to, big shout out to Le Wagon Bali. And feel free to reach out. And I hope you enjoyed our little review.
I appreciate that. Paulo, Celine, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.